Welcome to Resilience Unraveled. Hi everybody and welcome to Resilience Unraveled, a podcast that examines all aspects of personal and organisational resilience. A huge all-encompassing subject that covers the ability to thrive in life by harnessing your cognitive, emotional, physiological and contextual abilities. I share stories from people who have thrived despite remarkable obstacles, as well as highly successful practitioners and experts across a range of topics. And this podcast introduces their amazing stories and expertise, as well as my own reflections, perspectives, strategies and tips, which come from my own synthesis of themes and trends from wider learning. You can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Space Unraveled. So, let's get started. Enjoy the show. So today I'm talking to a different type of guest. We're going to be talking to Bob Berry. And Bob Berry is a virtual operations and user experience expert. And you know how we're mostly doing mental health and stories of resilience and how people have triumphed against adversity. Today it's really different. We're going to talk about the future. We're going to be talking about something that affects us all, technology. And Bob's your man when it comes to talking about technology. So hi, Bob.
Hello, Russell. Glad to be here.
Great. And I can detect from the accent already that you're not from these fair shores. So where are you in the world?
I'm based in Colorado Springs, the Rocky Mountains in the U.S.
And you were telling me earlier you're snowing at the moment in the middle of June, so that's
impressive. And it's not here in town, but in the mountains west of here, we are getting some actually fairly heavy snow in some areas.
Really? Oh, you see, jealous already. You could admire the sun, but there's something about snow. Well, look, it's a joy to be chatting to you today. So give me a bit of an overview of what it is you do. I mean, how would you describe what it is you get up to?
So my expertise is in what we call user experience, and it's about how human beings, how people interact with technology. And that can take on a lot of different contexts and different meanings. Certainly takes on a whole new set of meanings now that we're all dealing with coronavirus and dealing with the economic impact of that, and all of the ways that people are trying to figure out how to go contactless and be able to continue to conduct business and conduct their personal lives in this environment where we can no longer meet face to face and where we have to deal with some new economic realities where online, virtual, the web, the internet have become a solution to continuing to do what we need to do in life, both our personal lives and our business lives. So my expertise is figuring out how to create the right kind of experiences in those interactive situations so people and businesses can be successful and we can get done what we need to get done and do it easily, do it quickly, and make sure that it, for businesses, that it's cost effective as well.
Yeah. And how did you get to this point? I mean, what's your rough background? I mean,
well, I'm actually kind of
in a nutshell.
So I'm kind of a geek. I've always loved technology. As a kid, I was fascinated by shortwave radio. If you can remember shortwave radio, that goes way back. That dates me a little. And so when I got into college, I got into computer science, and I became fascinated by computers and computing technology and how information systems work. Actually, out of college, I went to work for Hewlett Packard for a number of years, which was fascinating. It was back in the day when Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard were still alive. It was a very different company back then. And we actually worked on the scientific instrument side. So I got to really learn about research in general, but also about how humans and computers and humans and technology interact. And that became an area of fascination for me. After I left.
And it's such a short time that we've been actually interacting with computers, really. It's only 2 decades, 3 decades?
Yeah, we tend to. I was actually involved in some of the early work that HP did when the internet and the web came along, which was early to mid 90s. So it's really been since then. Right. So it's been about, the web really came online and really became popular and accessible around the mid 90s. So it's been about 25 years or 20 years since it's been really popular and been very useful. And of course, not long after that, we all started using all these mobile devices, which is where,
Yeah.
That's where it really exploded.
Yeah. Okay, so you were in Hewlett Packard, and then past that, I know you've been busy with some of the big names in the world of
Yes.
Silicon Valley and such like.
So I did a lot of independent work after I left Hewlett Packard. I actually started a few companies, been involved in some startup ventures, a lot of it around user experience and inventing new types of ways for people to interact with technology. I started an education company to help young people learn about life and about careers and jobs and money. And then at the moment, I work for a company called Answer Lab, which is a major U.S. research company based out of New York and San Francisco. At the moment, I'm actually doing simultaneous projects for Amazon, Google, Facebook to help them make this transition to providing a lot more of what they do digitally, virtually, helping them create good experiences. At the same time, I'm also working on my own side gig, which is itstheusers.com, which is intended to help a lot of individual professionals and small companies to do the same kind of work to figure out how to create the right kinds of experiences. So as you can imagine, those big brands spend a lot of money. It's very expensive. They invest in this heavily, but individual professionals and small companies can't afford that. So with this itstheusers.com, I help those people make that transition and create these experiences as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Now there's a ton of stuff there to unpack. So, oh, goodness, where do we start? All right, let's start here. I mean, you know what it means. I'm sure everybody knows what it means, but just explain to us what user experience actually means.
We tend to define it fairly broadly. So it's definitely the very focused area where, like you and I are sitting here now on Zoom,
Yeah,
having this conversation across the planet, really. You're in the UK, I'm in the central US, and we're using this interface to record this podcast and have this conversation. That's one example of an experience. But we really look at it a lot broader than that. We tend to look at individuals and businesses' context about who they are, what matters to them. What is the narrative? What are people struggling with? What kinds of outcomes or goals are they seeking in life and in their own professions or their own businesses? And so when we take this experience of you and I sitting here at the computer, that's pretty narrow. But if we kind of zoom back and say, who is Russell? What is he trying to accomplish? What's he about? And then you're asking me these same questions about who am I? What's my history? What kind of things am I trying to accomplish in the world? That's all part of the experience as well.
yeah.
So we tend to look at it fairly broadly. So it's a day in the life. It's that full narrative of what people do. Then within that, we really focus on individual decisions that people make when they're doing this kind of interaction. In fact, my own theory or philosophy of this is that in business, nothing happens outside of individual choices that individual people make within the experiences we provide them. So I challenge anyone to name me a business outcome that is not based on an individual choice that happens within some experience that somebody's having. Within that context, then experience to a large extent is actually what drives the global economy.
Yeah.
So you take the sum total of all those decisions within all those experiences, and that's the national, international GDP that makes the world go around. So it's pretty central to everything that happens, and it's what we focus heavily on to make sure companies, individuals can get it right.
And that's fascinating, isn't it? Because a lot of people think that UX is a technology solution, but actually it's based on some really sound psychological principles as well. I mean, things like color affect people's decisions and mood and such like. People's choices, you say, can be filtered, manipulated, encouraged, whatever it might be, using some sort of biases like, anchoring techniques and the way we think about prices and such like. There's a whole, and I love this interplay between psychology and technology, and because actually we have to get one right or the other one wouldn't work. You have to understand people to be able to give the user interface that someone would actually be comfortable using. Otherwise, it would just be some sort of, there would be no interaction, would there?
There wouldn't be. And a lot of the professionals that I work with, I have a computer science background, but a lot of the other professionals I work with, a lot of my colleagues have backgrounds in behavioral sciences,
Yes.
in anthropology, in psychology. And so that those human dimensions and what motivates people,
Yeah.
what type of cognitive processes do they go through when they interact with technology? What kind of emotional reactions do they have to what might be happening when they're experiencing, whatever they're experiencing? Also, a lot of the research that we do doesn't involve technology.
Yes.
There's, and of course, a lot of what we used to do face to face is now transitioning, and in some parts of the world we're trying to get back to face, and
Yeah.
of course the jury's still out on how well that's going to go.
Yeah.
But again, all of those are individual experiences driven by human emotions, human cognitive capacities, human motivations, so that you really can't remove all those human dimensions. They're really essential to this whole science.
And so there's a sort of Venn diagram between the human, the machine, and that they're coming together. And it's the extent to which that middle circle grows is the extent to which the tool becomes something more useful than just a sort of literally a tool, but actually becomes something that's greater than the sum of its parts. I mean, this is why AI has been able to sort of gain such a foothold, isn't it? Because actually the work you guys have done in UX have actually made technology feasible and usable. And I mean, if you think about before any sort of lockdown, how many organizations were struggling to get their workers to work offline? Online, I should say. There was all sorts of issues around would people like it? Would the technology hold up? How would it work? Could we sit down all day? I don't trust you to do any work if you're sitting at home in your pajamas all day long. And within weeks, it's all changed.
It's all changed. Yes. Yeah. So a personal story. I have 5 kids, and one of them is named Russell too, by the way.
Oh wow! Good choice.
I have a daughter who works for the government. She works for the Forest Service here in the U.S. And when they were forced to lock down and go to remote, she has a boss that was very much a micromanager and really wanted to know what everybody was doing every minute. And that's changed dramatically. She's gotten to the point where there was just to keep track of everybody and what everybody was doing was just completely outside of what she had the bandwidth to do. She's just been forced to trust people. She's been forced to just give people general guidelines and agree on goals and outcomes and let them manage themselves and do the best they can. Of course, as we're all learning, that's actually in many cases working better than actually being in an office environment.
Yeah.
So that's one of many transitions that we're
experiencing. And it seems to me the challenge is that we don't rush to replicate the offline world online, but we understand the differences between the two things. So, for example, I was chatting to someone who was working as a senior leader in an organization who was telling me his job was finished at 10:30 in the morning. And he said to me, what am I doing for the rest of the day? And I said, well, what would you normally do? I'd sit in meetings. And I spoke to him a week later and I said, what are you doing this week? He said, I'm really busy. I said, what? It's because I'm just having all the same meetings as I used to have, but on Zoom now. And yet a meeting on Zoom can be 10 minutes. Or a learning intervention or training or whatever it might be. Whereas in the real world, it takes longer because you've got that human thing going on, haven't you? The sort of social joying about football and all the other sort of nonsense. And people think they've got to replicate that on Zoom, but actually it's about understanding the differences, how the technology is different to make sure that we don't create the same conditions, but worse online, as it were.
Yeah, I think there are some stories about people that have tried to do that replication and have found it just hasn't worked. And I think you have to allow people their humanness and allow them to to build and manage their own space, their own relationships, and figure out how to. There's only so much of it that technology is going to be able to replicate or enable. It definitely has its limitations. There's no question about that.
So if we think then okay, that we potentially have to get, or we have this opportunity to really sweat the technological asset for a change rather than it being the other way around. how would businesses, how do organizations, how do people think about this move to online? What should they be considering?
Well, a lot of it depends, obviously, the type of business that you have and the kinds of customers that you have. We're witnessing a lot of very intriguing innovations, and some of them are people discovering how to use whatever assets they have now and apply them in new ways. So the
Right.
classic example, which we're all seeing in each of our communities, is, for example, the restaurants.
Yes.
So as we've gone to lockdown, some restaurants have just not been able to cope
Yeah.
because they haven't been able to adapt. There's a cafe right here in our neighborhood, just a couple blocks away, that has taken what they do, which is obviously about food, and they've taken the food suppliers that they have, and they've now turned themselves into a little corner market.
Yes.
And they built new online ordering, shopping, payment systems. And they somehow managed to expand their liquor license so that
Wow.
you can now go online and order mixed drinks and order produce and fresh meats and cheeses and all these kinds of things. And then just walk in this, pay for it online. Everything's ready to go. They have it all packaged. You don't have to spend any more time in the store than to just walk in and grab the bags and leave.
Yeah.
And they limit the number of people that are in the store at any given time. So they've learned how to adapt. They've looked at their existing resources. They've made some minor changes in their online experience to enable new set of services and products. And the people in the neighborhood have really adapted to it and really appreciate it. It's been a great service for us in the neighborhood. Yeah. Another example is a construction company that does remodels of homes. I live in an old neighborhood, so there's a lot of remodel going on.
Yeah.
And so that's obviously a very high touch kind of thing, or used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they've figured out how to adapt all of that to video. So now they will show you how to go around your house with your phone, your smartphone, and take videos of what you want remodeled.
Yeah.
And then using video, they'll come back to you and provide you actual simulations of what a remodeled room might look like based on the videos you send them. And has materials and colors and fabrics and whatever you want to do. And then they'll actually then give you video simulations as well of how they'll come in and do the work and how they actually manage the day-to-day interactions. And so they've figured out how to adapt using online video. And there's so many examples. And then, we probably have all had interactions with our doctors and had medical consultations, through Zoom or through some other platform that we just never would have thought about doing before.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it is just taking what a lot of companies and individual professionals are doing now and figuring out how to make that contact virtual instead of the face-to-face contact that we used to do. And I could name, lots of other examples.
But it's interesting. There's still an implication, or there's still a suspicion that we need to have this human contact. So, for example, I was listening to a restaurant talking today about a very famous restaurant down in the Cornwall, talking about the fact that if you're going to be 2 meters apart, well, what happens when the sommelier arrives at the table, or the waiter or waitress, because they have to be in that space, so they have to use iPads, and you can make the online ordering experience completely different. Now, if you go on a cruise ship, those things are already there. And it's this investment in technology, which can be a real problem. In fact, arguably the critical department in an organization now is going to be technology, not the traditional old IT support help desk, turn it on, turn it off again, but a proper CTO. It sounds to me like you're going to have someone in every organization who's going to need to be driving forward that technological asset in the organization, because it seems to be that all of us now are technology businesses with products and services built on.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges is going to be for people that are not like me, that are very comfortable and very familiar with technology.
Yeah.
How are we going to help those people learn how to be successful, learn how to interact? Some of the silly examples are, I don't know if you've heard this story. A couple of weeks ago, our U.S. Supreme Court was actually hearing cases online. And this is the first time they'd tried this.
Yeah.
And somebody needed to take a bathroom break and forgot to mute their computer. And so in the midst of this highest court in the land, these all distinguished judges, you could hear the sound of a flushing toilet. And so people still have there's a lot of people, and in some cases it may be older people that, it might be even our generation and older, that have not had the amount of experience and time that a lot of younger people have had with this technology. How are we going to make it useful and usable to them so that they can figure out how to navigate it and be comfortable with it and not have it get in the way of the things that they're trying to do? So like you said, there's going to need to be people in organizations as these new interactions are invented and this new technology comes online that are going to have to ensure that everybody has access, that everybody can do what they need to do, and they're not getting stuck or getting lost. And, and of course, one of the sad examples is what's happening now with the virus in a lot of our senior homes.
Yes.
And the reliance there on technology, because you can't go and visit anymore.
Yeah.
And even a sadder example is what's happening in hospitals as people are suffering from the virus, and in their last interactions in many cases with their family members is through a cell phone screen.
Yeah.
And so there's just so many examples of profound ways that the technology is having to replace what we normally have done. And the more, and as isolated and as sad as those cases are, that technology is providing them some small measure of connection and some small measure of closure, whatever that might be.
Yeah.
And so, we need to continue to be inventive and innovative and figure out how to make all of that work better and continue to advance our ability to do those kinds of things.
It is a fascinating problem, but it's also an amazing, from my perspective, thinking about the neuropsychology of people, this idea that as people get older, the more they embrace change, of course, the more they build the neuroplasticity of their brains and such like. And there are great stories of people who are older and who are suddenly FaceTiming their relatives or Skyping or Zooming and suddenly they've gone from seeing their relatives or having a postcard or a letter, once every 6 months to a year. They're now online every single week. And I think it's that thing about saying the paradigm shift for people who are older is bigger than for people who are younger, but that doesn't mean that it can't be bridged. Somehow the technology has to be more enabling or cuddlier or user-friendly, because the logic is different, isn't it? If you've grown up in the early 1900s to having grown up in the very, very late 1900s, and it's that challenge, isn't it? It's about how do we instill a different logic into people, and I suppose that's where you guys come in.
Yeah, and in many ways, the lessons that we're learning now from those interactions and the number of people now that have to rely on these technologies, where before it was a convenience or it was a novelty or whatever it might be, it's begun to, in many cases, shift to a necessity.
Yeah,
which for a lot of us in the profession is a new challenge.
Yeah,
because before the urgency wasn't there, and again the difference between, in some cases it's life and death kind of situations, and that's a new challenge for us to figure out how to for people that may be significantly impaired, that may not have much experience with technology. How are we going to create devices? How are we going to create interfaces? How are we going to create experiences now that that remove a lot of the friction and remove a lot of the challenges that people traditionally have had with this technology? So it's definitely a new frontier in many ways.
And I think the excitement for me is AI,
mm-hmm.
which is mildly exciting, but I'm now getting out my favorite bit of kit out of the box and just waving it in your direction. And this I think is the future, which is VR, virtual reality. And, you look at learning and training and simulate, the thing you said about house redesign. I think we've got a situation coming soon where if you learn how to wear a headset, which is the barrier to entry, as it were, to acceptance, as it was, the idea that you're there in real time, that could radically transform the world. In fact, there was a book written in the early 1910s or 20s called The Hood, which is the story of a person that had this early prescient writer who talked about this idea of a hood where you wore this headset and the human beings lost their ability to move because their entire sensory experience was generated by virtual reality. And I just wonder how far we're away from that VR experience coming in, because that's the ultimate user experience, isn't it?
Well, we're actually some baby steps in that direction.
Mm.
So Apple is starting to introduce a new technology. It's called LiDAR. You maybe have seen some press releases about this. Their latest iPad has this technology in the camera, and Apple's about to launch their iPhone 12 series, and the iPhone 12 will have this LiDAR technology in the camera as well. Well, so what this does, so what you just described is virtual reality. It creates an entire immersive experience.
Yeah.
But there's also this intermediate stage, which is augmented reality.
Yes.
And so the LiDAR in your phone, so now you can pick up your smartphone, and the camera in the smartphone will be able to sense the physical space around you.
Wow.
And you can now start to merge the actual real experience, the physical experience of what's around you, with some augmented intelligence and some artificial simulations as well. So, for example, for simple things like designing what you want in a room, for purchasing furniture,
Yes.
or for managing, and of course now that we're a lot more sensitive to physical space and social distancing, there might be more creative ways to manage how we interact with one another when we're in more confined spaces. So this ability now of smartphones to be able to detect our physical environment beyond what the camera can do is an intermediate step towards that type of artificial space management and reality kind of experience so that's coming, and soon we're going to all have it in our phones. So it's going to be a big deal, and it's going to be a lot of fun too, I think. So we'll look forward to seeing what they do with it.
We no longer need car showrooms, do we? Because that's going to do away with all of that, because you don't, apart from this is why I think about the VR thing, because it's the central experience of driving is created. But I mean, that's half step is, will revolutionize the way we sell certain products, won't it? Because you'll be able to get a closer grasp of what they're all about.
So I'm curious, in your profession right now, with everything that's happening in the world, what are you hearing about some of the big challenges that people are dealing with when it comes to, just life in general, but also how they deal with technology and how they deal with technology replacing a lot of the things that they, the traditional ways that they used to do things?
Well, I think there's a bell curve, isn't there, between those people who are actively pushing it away and running and hiding from it, those through to those at the other end who are fully embracing and yelling for more. And then you get everybody in between. You've also got people who, of course, are the end of the bell curve that says, actually, I'm going to lose my job because of technology, and I am educationally impoverished because I don't have the wherewithal to be able to reskill. And we often talk about sort of, white collar jobs where it's all great to have all this technology around us because we've got stacks of cash and we do something about it. But if you're working 3 jobs, delivering pizzas and such like, you're going to be disenfranchised from this. So I think there's going to be a social engineering problem in the future that's going to come from this, which is, it's just one of those things. I think it's possibly the most innovative time I've lived through in terms of thinking about this. And I just think people are struggling. 2 things they're struggling with. They're struggling with the core infrastructure. So we've all got the technology, but we don't have the bandwidth to actually run the technology. So if you're in this country and we've been having 10 outages a day on a business broadband connection because of the way our supplier works. And we're not in the country or hidden anywhere. We're in near a large city and such like. And so the infrastructure in the country is a big thing. And of course, the internet itself, I think there's big issues around that. So I think there's the fancy down stuff, there's the fundamentals, and I think there's the bit in the middle, which is how you reprocess, re-engineer the way you think about technology and begin to use it. As I say, you can't just shift everything online and just replicate what you did. And in the world of therapy, a lot of people have just done that and said, okay, let's do some sophisticated counseling or hypnotherapy. Let's just do it online, doing it the same way. And I think we need to be cleverer than that.
We do.
If the technology is that clever and human beings are that clever, it's how do we actually, not replace our own cleverness with the limitations of the technology again. We have to force the technology to work for us again. I think that's really important.
So
Long answer, sorry.
In this context of resilience, I would guess that my next question was going to be, so is the technology helping people be more resilient, or is it making resilience more challenging given everything else I have to deal with? My guess is that's probably also a bell curve. There are probably people that find a lot of this enabling and it's making their lives easier, and for some people it's just yet more stuff to figure out and more stuff that doesn't work, or it creates more frustration, et cetera, that for them.
I mean, you still get issues in this country of certain organizations who won't use Zoom because we've heard Zoom's not safe. It's run by the Chinese, and therefore we have to use Microsoft Teams. And so you still get that large scale, top down management by risk and management by bureaucracy. So we have to use Microsoft Teams. It's not as good, it's not as useful, it's not as reliable, but it's approved. And therefore we're going to do it. And so the levers of power in some of the big organizations and the big institutions are something that will hang on to the past if we're not careful. And it's almost like we've set lots of rabbits loose running across a field, and we've got some quite big farmers with huge guns firing rounds and salvos at those people. Going back, get back in the box, there's a protocol for that, and we're not writing a new one because we invented this in 1862, and there's no way we're getting back to it. I mean, is that your reading over there in the States?
Yeah, I think that's pretty consistent. My sense is that I'm also kind of a news junkie, and even more so now with everything, especially the last few weeks in the U.S. with everything happening over here, and of course now it's spreading. The whole issues around social justice and police reform and everything are now spreading worldwide. But I think that a lot of the challenges that you're facing there in the UK, I think a lot of them are comparable to what's happening here in the US.
Yeah.
So this is going to be a big deal. Another one that I think is sort of on the horizon, or maybe it's starting to become more integrated into our lives, is this whole issue around personal privacy and what role technology will play in that. And I actually have done quite a bit of research on privacy, and I think we're about to completely redefine what that means, because I think to really get a handle on the virus, and now that we're in the US trying to open back up, and summer's coming, and of course with all the protests in the street now, our curve was going down and it's now hit an inflection point and it's starting back up again. And there are some places in the US where the virus is really starting to take off again, which of course everybody was concerned was going to happen. And we'll very shortly be seeing the effects of all these large gatherings in the streets. Yeah. But at some point, to get a handle on this, we're going to need some combination of testing, tracing, tracking, vaccinations, and all of this to get out of this cycle. Yeah. Which means that part of that solution is probably going to be technology. And if that's true, then we're going to have to be willing to give up some maybe major aspects of our personal privacy, way beyond what we've done so far. And I think, I certainly in this country, I think there's going to be a tremendous resistance to that in a lot of sectors, a lot of segments of the population. What's the kind of the general reaction or the general feeling in the UK about those privacy issues right now with regard to the virus?
Well, I think we've got two streams of privacy, haven't we? We've got the commercial privacy, which is the fact that Google knows everything you've ever done inside leg measurements, Facebook, all those sort of platforms. And I think people are slow. I think the Cambridge Analytica thing really woke people up to this idea. And of course, the Europeans are much more interested in privacy in a way, which is where the GDPR sort of swash came through. Sort of came from the European side. But it is interesting the degree to which different cultures treat their own privacy. And, if you look arguably at sort of test, track and trace out in Singapore and Asia, they think differently about public privacy over there. So they've got more centralized apps, and they're giving, they're thinking, they're not so bothered about that because there's a sort of a sense of a greater good. But as you come across to our more so supposedly independent, supposedly democratic, supposedly freer countries, over here, we sort of have this illusion of privacy. We have this illusion of freedom, don't we? And so we tend to defend and rail against this, even though everybody knows everything. already. What we just haven't done is monetize our own brands. We just haven't figured that bit out yet, that we're valuable. We just give the value away to someone else.
Yes, right.
But I think
well,
it's go on, sorry.
Maybe with this transformation, maybe people will be willing to take a little bit more ownership for it. Maybe it'll bubble it up to the point where people better understand the importance of it. I don't know. We'll see. I think the jury's still out on that one.
I think what's been interesting about this for me has been the democratization and the revealing of the idea of the extent to which the media have lost their influence and lost their trust. This idea that actually we watched the events of is it Minneapolis? I can't remember the city now. I think it was, and that was the good side of social media. But what we've seen is the bad side of the media, going out, creating negativity, creating fear, panic, anxiety, all that sort of stuff, basically because they've got nothing else to talk about 24/7. And now they've got, that situation, we've got something else to talk about. And I think what we see now is that there's a negative effect of the content which sits on the technology being important. Because if you've got vitriolic content on great technology, you've got issues on your hands. I mean, we're getting to a sort of 1984 scenario here, aren't we? With people who are taking great technology and really starting to undermine some of the big sort of levers of democracy in the West, I think.
That is definitely happening, and you're right about the public popular media and press. I think that something that's completely unprecedented, there's a lot of things that are unprecedented. I think we've used that word too much, but something that's completely unprecedented is the amount of information we have right now at our fingertips, in our pockets, and yet the complete lack of knowledge and truth that we have.
Yes.
So there's so many conflicting perspectives, and even around something like the virus itself, it seems like things change every day on how much distance should we be keeping, what happens indoors versus outdoors, how good are masks, what treatments work and what don't. And even the major organizations like the World Health Organization and here in the US, the CDC, it seems like the answers constantly change.
Yes.
And there's all sorts of experts and talking heads that want to share their opinions. And so there's so much information, but so little knowledge, and I think I at times even find that overwhelming.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, isn't it? And this difference when we talked about that Venn diagram. We've got the technologies sort of let an information cat out of the bag, and actually we don't have the mechanisms to synthesize or being able to make sense of that anymore, because the traditional press, the traditional media, are part of the problem now. They're just platforms now. They're not trusted content. The BBC over here has lost its luster recently. It's been seen openly to be, not impartial anymore. I mean, so we're having a situation now where I think we're in an interesting time, aren't we? We're in that fascinating, as I say, that Venn diagram makes it fascinating for us how much technology is hobbling us and freeing us, but it's making us less trusting. So maybe all we will be able to rely on soon is technology. Maybe it will be an algorithm that allows us to search through every social media file and say, well, actually, this is the average view, but this is the actual fact that was said.
Yes,
because the human hasn't spun it into a channel to make it different every single day.
And we're seeing that now in a big way. And I regularly do work with Facebook and Twitter and other social media companies, and we're right now on the cusp of those platforms having to make very difficult decisions about content.
Yeah.
So the technology is there to enable us to put out anything we want to. And sometimes it feels like our president is willing to put out just about anything he wants to. And as a society, what are we going to do about that?
Yeah.
Because again, individual people, there's a very wide span of people's capacity to make informed choices about what's true and what's not.
Yes.
And we so easily get drawn in by these cults of personality and conspiracy theories, and Yeah, it's chaos right now. Probably more, it's certainly more than it's ever been. And so from the standpoint of what you do and people's ability to cope and what really is resilience, I think we're making it a lot harder for people in that regard.
Well, it's different, and I think like everything, difference creates all sorts of ambiguities and such like. And no doubt there'll be some lawyer sitting, in an office somewhere, licking his lips, and printing a new set of business cards because this is a new opportunity for them. Because the person with the biggest gun chasing those rabbits is always the lawyers slowing everything down.
Yes, right. Yeah.
I mean, this is part of the issue of less 20 years, isn't it? The effective litigation. Yeah. Now, I'm conscious that I'm not being respectful of your time at all here. I'm conscious we've got onto big picture, almost philosophy here. But let's bring it back. Let's bring it back to the sort of manageable.
Okay.
So I know you have a bunch of tools and content resources which are great for people to actually make these decisions for their own selves and their own businesses. So tell us a bit more about that and how we can get hold of you, Bob.
Yeah. So if you we created a landing page for your podcast. If you go to itstheusers.com/resilience. Then we have a pretty extensive library of courses, ebooks, materials, how-to templates, etc., that can help you get started from the very beginning on user experience and how to do a lot of the adaptations that we're talking about and how to create the kinds of experiences that are going to work for your business and whatever customers or audience you're trying to reach. In addition to that, that's all free. In addition to that, I will provide a personalized consulting session for you as well to help you get started, because this can be kind of complicated. And again, I do this constantly for the biggest brands in the world, so I'd be very happy to share that. We're also in the process as researchers of really trying to learn what people are doing. So if you decide to sign up for that, I will certainly share what I know and help people with their own challenges. But I'm going to want to listen and learn and find out how people are dealing with this as well. So this will be a two-way exchange. So again, it's theusers.com/resilience, and you can get all the downloadable materials for free, and we can have that dialogue about how I can help you and what's happening in your world, and we can start to put together some knowledge on how to do this better.
Brilliant. And it's without an apostrophe, just to...
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, just to make that great. That's absolutely fantastic. Bob, it's been an absolute joy. And I whilst I know I could chat to you all day, I cannot, because that would not be fair for your time. So thank you so much for spending time with us today. I've really appreciated your contribution.
Russell, it's been a joy. All the best to you and all your audience as well.
Thanks so much. You take care.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I hope you found that episode useful and interesting. Feedback is always welcomed, and if you are in the mood to subscribe to us or even leave a comment on iTunes or Stitcher, that would be amazing. If you want to suggest ideas or even people you would like me to interview, then reach out to us at qedod.com/contact. As I said earlier, you can go to qedod.com/podcasts for show notes or follow the links. And you can go to qedod.com/extras to access offers, tools and resources, including free articles and ebooks. For those of you that would be interested in supporting our work and contributing more proactively, you can find our new Patreon page at patreon.com. Then search for Resilience Unraveled. I look forward to being in your ear next time around. Take care.